Right then, welcome back to another one of our videos. Today we're going to be talking about the cloud and in particular the benefits of moving IT infrastructure into the cloud and everything that comes along with that. So as always, I'm joined by some of the brains within the HBP Group. That's Tony Pearson, James Royle, Ryan Garlick today, all who obviously work on the IT side of our business. So I think first and foremost, just to kind of quantify, just for people that maybe don't really understand what the difference is between being in the cloud or on-premise, as we call it. Ryan, do you just want to kind of explain what the basic difference between those two things is?
Yeah, so I think the key difference for me is on-premise is where all your equipment is on your site. So all the servers and networking equipment that you may require is physically at your location. In the cloud, essentially what we're doing is taking all of that software, all of the IT, and we're moving it to someone else's platform, e.g. Microsoft platform. There's obviously Amazon AWS, moving it to their platform. So the ownership on the responsibility side of things for that equipment is with those vendors.
So the technology in the back end is still virtually the same. It's just really whether or not we're connecting to a device or a server that's in our office physically or in a data center. Is that as kind of as simple as?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just in a different location now.
Yeah. And Tony, how popular a choice is this now for businesses to move to the cloud? Is this kind of, are we in rapid growth? Is it slow adoption? Where are we at in the market when it comes to cloud?
Cloud adoption since the dreaded word COVID, I think, has really skyrocketed. Obviously, we've seen, as the UK and the rest of the world have seen, people having to work from home, and in having to work from home, that then leverages kind of the same technology that they need in place to technically run cloud, whether it's infrastructure as a service, as Ryan said, taking what's on-prem and moving it up there, or moving to a SaaS-based solution, which is like a full cloud-based solution from there. So the uptake's been massive over COVID, and I think it will continue to grow now as people see the benefits in working from home and the risks of not offering that, whether it be getting staff or whether it be if there's another similar pandemic in the future. By the fact of putting it in the cloud, it does give those businesses that flexibility that you can work from anywhere, anytime.
Yeah. And I did a little bit of research and things before this, and I think startups nowadays, it's a clear winner when it comes to cloud. Obviously, quite obvious why really people coming into the market can find that software quite quickly and build from there. Also, enterprise businesses, the much larger businesses, have been on this for a while. There's been strategies in place. One of the slower uptakes has been in the, whatever people call it, SME, SMB, small and medium-sized businesses, which is who we often deal with. Do you think there's a reason for that, James? Why maybe the SME market is a little bit further behind? Are there certain challenges that they come across that make it more difficult to move to the cloud?
I think out of the three groups of users you mentioned there, the entry level, the startups, yes, they're going to adopt new technology very quickly as they're starting up. The corporates are going to go through hardware refreshes a lot quicker than the SMB and SME market, which traditionally is always going to try and hold on to their assets and sweat the money out of them as much as they possibly can. So we'll only move to new solutions and new services if they really, really have to. What's happening in the market and what has driven the cloud over the last few years is the adoption of Microsoft 365. So moving your email primarily away from your on-premise hardware up into the cloud. That's being driven by Microsoft increasingly making Exchange as big as possible, so therefore the hardware to run it being as big as possible. And once element of your infrastructure in the cloud, it's a lot easier for the rest of it to go. So that could be the key reason that the SMB, they just want to keep hold of their hardware as much as possible, sweat the asset, and move only when they have to.
Yeah. Okay. And then Tony, so once they get into a position where potentially they can move, what are the main benefits that people are going to see? I mean, IT is often about continuity and not affecting the end users. They can just carry on doing their jobs. So where do the benefits come, and how do they affect either end users or the business as a whole?
I think before I answer that question, I think there's kind of a key thing we need to understand here. And when we say moving to the cloud, there's kind of in our marketplace, there's kind of two options. One is SaaS, software as a service. So you're consuming a service like Xero or Advanced Business Cloud, like Dynamics 365. You're consuming a product that is basically delivered via a web browser down to anywhere anytime, any place. And you're just buying that application. The other thing we see, or the move, is what we call infrastructure as a service, and that's basically taking everything you've got on site and moving it into a data center, as Ryan alluded to earlier. So there's these two big differentiators here. The benefits are massive to a business. If you go down the SaaS route, you've got a very dynamic application that's always updated, always available. A platform that's obviously tried and tested, because something like Dynamics, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of other users on it. So there's those added benefits, as well as the cost. That tends to be more of a cost-effective solution. I suppose the slight downside to SaaS is it's a very rigid solution. They will do what they will do, and they'll deliver what they deliver. You can't bespoke them in most cases, so you get what they can do. Whereas if you go infrastructure as a service, the benefits are is we're taking what was traditionally on-premise solutions, putting them into a cloud situation. And these might be applications like Sage 200, Pegasus Opera, Exchequer, where there isn't a SaaS-based, there isn't a proper cloud-based solution, but we can leverage the technology and make them cloud-based, run them alongside things like 365, and then deliver them through a remote desktop service down to the clients. That basically giving the benefits of flexibility. Again, we can access it anywhere, anytime. The end user, the customer, doesn't have to worry about upgrades or hardware issues. And generally, moving to something like an infrastructure as a service platform, that provider is going to invest way more in the technology and the resilience and lines, cooling, power, hardware than a normal SME will ever be able to afford to or ever want to. So you've got that added level of security and resilience on top as well.
So we can kind of, although nothing's ever certain in IT, we can kind of assume that it's going to be more secure. Can we assume as well more uptime, or a better chance of more uptime?
Yeah, more uptime, more secure, more scalable as well. The ability to flex up and down is there. So if we need a bit more power for the next 6 months because we're dealing with a project, we don't have to go out and buy another server and commission it. We can simply turn the power up on one of the additional servers there and leverage that resource quickly and easily and cost effectively.
Okay. And Ryan, are we getting to the point now where we can pretty much pick up any on-premise situation and move it into the cloud, or are there still things out there that make it either impossible or just a much bigger challenge?
Yeah, as Tony touched on there, there's two ways we can go down that. The infrastructure as a service pretty much allows us to take any situation and move it to the cloud, whether that be just an application or the entire infrastructure. Depends on the applications you want to work on in the cloud. Some applications still require like a local server. When I say local, that can be in the cloud. And some will work in the cloud absolutely fine. Tony mentioned Zero there, perfectly scalable product. If you wanted to add on another 5 users, you can go on, just up your subscription to another 5 users, and that's what makes it really good. But you know, there's options for anybody that's looking to move to the cloud. You know, if it's one application or the whole infrastructure, we can do any of that.
Okay. And come back to you, Tony, then, just around this flexibility piece. I think sometimes from an end user point of view, that can be difficult to understand. So some people will have had remote desktop where they can work from home, and effectively they're connecting into the office as opposed to connecting into a cloud service. What's more flexible about the cloud compared to having the server in the office and connecting into it that way?
Traditionally, we talk a few years ago, if you weren't a business that was set up for remote working, or you weren't a business that was multi-site, you couldn't just go externally and connect into the server and run legacy applications. You'd have to commission a terminal server, you'd have to set up VPNs, you'd have to set up access, and then all the security backup and everything that goes along that. So it's not something that we can do overnight, and we saw this over COVID. The businesses that had multi-sites or had already set up home working transitioned really quickly and easily because they had the technology in place. The ones that didn't had to invest and rush and spend time and money on commissioning things like terminal services, remote access configuration and things like that. So the benefit is if you're already in the cloud and you already moved your infrastructure as a service that way, you're already using that technology. It's already there, it's already in place, which then means you've got that flexibility at any time, anywhere to work whenever and however you want. So that's kind of the differences, really.
Okay. And Ryan touched on this briefly, James, but is this sort of thing where customers can start thinking, I won't need to upgrade anymore then? I won't need to ever buy a new server. I'll simply just increase what I'm doing. And what about software as well when it comes to upgrading operating systems and things like that?
Yeah, it cuts out the whole hassle of having to think about upgrading in the future. Commonly, a refresh cycle for a server in a corporate world would be about 3 years. For SME would be about 5 to 7 years. But as Tony mentioned right at the beginning, you're basically now paying for a service. You're not paying for hardware. You're not paying for a piece of kit that's going to get slower and more difficult to maintain and upkeep for the next foreseeable future. Well, you're paying for a service. So therefore, you don't have to invest in operating systems on the infrastructure level. Key thing about this is you still need to keep your endpoints up to date. So your laptops and your desktops need to be a suitable level to work. But yeah, you're cutting out all of that support and maintenance and future upgrade costs of hardware.
Okay. And if we just tap into that security piece again, then you've mentioned obviously keeping hardware up to date. I assume we're still going to need some level of hardware on premise, i.e. the devices themselves. I guess there's some networking equipment, some security equipment. What do we still need there, Tony? And when you put that all into context, then what extra level of security does it give a business compared to hosting it themselves on their own equipment?
So, so from what they need on premise, yes, you'll need a device, whether that be an iPad, a tablet, whatever that might be. You'll need some form of connectivity, so you're going to need an internet connection. You could use 4G if you wanted to. You might want to be cabled in, you might not. You could run Wi-Fi. So there's a limited amount of small infrastructure kit that we need on site. Obviously, the endpoint and some means of connecting it to the internet. The security around that will really depend on how you configure your infrastructure as a service. You could tunnel everything back through to the data center and handle things like the security there from firewall perspective, or you could still break out locally. And if that's the case, it's still recommended to have some form of firewall with some levels of content filtering and security built in. It's still recommended to have endpoint protection and the standard things like that, fish threat training, anti-spam, and the usual type of things. When we talk about the data center and security, because if we're talking about infrastructure as a service, we are talking a lift and shift. So the level of security that's needed there is only the same as what you'd have on-prem, whether it be firewall, whether it be anti-malware protection, antivirus protection on that server. It would need to be the same because it's only what you'd be running locally in the cloud. I suppose when we talk about security, we probably should talk about kind of the security of the hardware and the uptime, because what you are getting extra is obviously all that investment in infrastructure. It'll be replication, multiple servers, multiple backup options, all those things that you probably in SME wouldn't want to afford because it would be an overkill. You are getting those levels of security, multiple lines for failover, cooling, UPSs, generators, all those things that you probably wouldn't invest in. And if you had it on-prem and you had a power cut, then you'd be dead in the water. Whereas if you're in the cloud and you have a power cut on site, it's in the data center, well, that's covered by a generator. Yes, you wouldn't have power on site, but everybody could go home to their locations and still work. So that's how you need to look at it from a security perspective.
Okay. And Ryan, how long have on-premise solutions got left then in their kind of current form as people are using them? Is this something that's on its way out very quickly, or do we still expect to see them exist in, say, 10, 15 years' time?
I certainly think there's still going to be some on-premise solutions. I think some, clients and people are setting the mindset they like to see that physical asset. They like to see the physical investment that they've made in these solutions, rather than it just being somewhere else that they can't not necessarily see, but that they don't have sort of overall control of. It's out of their control, as it were. So I always think there's going to be an element of some people wanting a physical kit on site and being able to see it. But I think as the shift happens, more and more people are going to move across to cloud-based solutions now because it's for the convenience. I think obviously Tony touched on it earlier that when the pandemic started, those people are already sort of partially in the cloud for their systems. It was so convenient then to go work from home when the order was given to work from home. Whereas these clients that had everything on premise it was a struggle and there was a big investment. So I think, yeah, absolutely, this pandemic's only going to drive it more to the cloud.
Okay. And James, how are people approaching this from a planning point of view? Obviously, this could be quite a scary thing for people, quite exciting as well, moving into the cloud, but quite scary as well, out of comfort zone a little bit. Obviously, Rome wasn't built in a day, so this isn't going to happen overnight, moving everything over to the cloud necessarily. How are most people approaching this? Is this a 5-year plan, or is it a case of at the cycle, like as you mentioned, when they're replacing servers, they're considering it then?
Yeah, for some customers, particularly around when COVID broke, it was a mad panic. Everything had to get up to the cloud ASAP. But those that had the foresight, like Ryan said, to move further into the cloud, the whole process for them was a lot easier. As we're talking to customers now, we're seeing a cloud first mentality. So a lot of people that are making the decisions on when they're buying IT kit or IT solutions, can it go in the cloud? So that's the question that is asked. If you've already got a cloud presence, it's a lot easier to get stuff up there quickly. If you've got a hosted server, that applications can go on it quite easily. Xero and other SaaS products have been mentioned. You know, they're already there. They already can be plugged into. So the easiest thing to do for a customer that's looking to go into cloud is to engage with somebody like us. We can look through their current product stack and give them an idea of what can be easily transferred up, and then talk through the process and how we do it. Most of these processes can be done with minimal disruption. So if the hardware is up for refresh, if the infrastructure is struggling, now's the time to bring people in to start talking about what the alternatives are. Because at the end of the day, if you commit to a piece of hardware now, you probably are committing to it again for 3 to 5 years. And we know how much IT has moved on in the last 3 to 5 years. Do you really want to restrict yourself by buying a piece of hardware? So it's always worth having that discussion to see how far. A lot of people are probably already in the cloud already. It just needs to be that little push to get their main infrastructure items up there.
And that's basically through planning then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it having that forethought to say, we are going to go there, how do we get there? And if it takes 3 or 4 steps along the way and changing different bits at a time, that's kind of how we can get people to do that sensibly and planned out.
It's being open to the idea of it as well. Some people are very close-minded about it because they don't like the fact. They'll probably use cloud a huge amount in their personal life, but for some reason, when it comes to their business role, they want to keep it very, very much on premise. So it's a case of being open-minded. It doesn't have to be a big bang. It can be a gradual process. It's all designed, the processes that we work through anyway, are designed to have minimal disruption for the business. So it's having a strategic plan of moving from one type of platform to another.
And what are those objections? Ryan's obviously mentioned the just kind of the comfort, if you like, of being able to see your investment in your building. The typical ones we've seen in the past were around security, which we've covered a bit today, of it probably being more secure than what anyone could afford on premise. And there are other things that are stopping people, or are those still the 2 main ones?
I think they're the main ones. Genuinely, some users, some customers do like seeing green flashing lights on bits of hardware because that gives them satisfaction that their business is safe and secure. Security, again, is another thing about data being up there, but the amount of solutions and services that are out there now on the cloud, those arguments are being just closed out straight away. So I suppose the last biggest problem would be if you've got huge files that you're transporting between the cloud and your end users, like an architect, for example. Is that a suitable user to have in the cloud? Bandwidth these days, the thin implementation of stuff, I don't think there's any solution out there that can't be managed in the cloud in some shape or form. So the regular arguments that we get, unless the customer is adamant they're not going to go near it, I think we can get over most objections quite easily.
Okay. And then the final thing to talk about is obviously the cost. So I think there's definitely a few different opinions out there about the cost of cloud and moving to the cloud. I mean, if we talk Xero, we're talking, I don't know what the price is nowadays, but it's certainly around the £10 mark once when it started. Where you look at the other end of the market, someone like Salesforce, one of the biggest cloud companies out there, hugely expensive, massively expensive piece of software, always been based in the cloud as well. So we've got extremes of this. When we come into that small and medium-sized market, Tony, what can people expect? Is it going to be relatively the same price, or is it just one of those it depends questions?
I think it's a bit of both, Phil, if I'm honest. I think the key thing, if we're talking about infrastructure as a service and moving your entire business from where it is, we're not talking about new startups, we're talking about that core SMB, SME. and you're looking at moving, it isn't going to be cheaper. I think that needs to be clear. It isn't going to be cheaper. Is it going to be more expensive? Possibly, depending on what. Is it going to be a tiny bit cheaper? Possibly as well. But I think businesses don't go into this expecting it to be cheaper. What you're getting is all that added security and resilience that we spoke about, that added flexibility, and that peace of mind that they have. It's one less thing that business needs to worry about. And also, I think it helps with budgeting and forecasting going forwards, because you haven't got to think every 7 years, I've got a £50,000 IT refresh I've got to spend and have all this upheaval, month on month, year on year. It's a continuing cost that will remain fairly constant over that if the business remains constant in its consumption. So I think you've got to look at it in its plus points, not look at it from a cost perspective, that it's more resilient, more secure, certainly more flexible for businesses, and gives that business that elasticity, that agile approach that businesses need nowadays.
Brilliant. And just a final question, just to go around to each of them, on your opinion nowadays, if a business comes to you and talks about what they should do, are you all on board now with saying the cloud has got to be the first point of call? Because for many years, it hasn't necessarily been the leader. There's been a point where it's been 50-50. Are we all of the opinion now that this is the way businesses need to go and this is the way businesses need to plan for the future?
I think, well, yeah, a simple answer there, isn't it, Tony? Yeah, I think so. There's so many options in cloud now that, like James said, you can overcome any sort of quandary or query that customer may have, and any problems they may have, that it's got to be the leading option.
Absolutely. And I'd just add on that, the last 4 significant infrastructure refreshes we've done in the last couple of months have all been going from on-prem to cloud. So we're absolutely confident this is the way to go. Yes, there's use cases where it might be significantly more expensive and significantly more cost effective to have on-prem still, to do with legacy applications or business setups. But I think as a whole, in that SME marketplace, it's either full cloud or it's certainly significant hybrid cloud, where the majority is in the cloud anyway.
Yeah, I think I'll put my end user hat on for a little while. We've worked, obviously, all have worked within companies where we're on if you like, the cutting edge of IT technology for users. Having the stuff in the cloud, having your applications and data in the cloud as an end user makes my life so much more easy and flexible. I can work from any of our offices. I can work from home as I am now. I can work from McDonald's. I can work from a customer site. I can work in the car if I need to. As long as I'm connected, then I can work. With Office 365, I've even got stuff cached on my local device, so I can start working on that and then don't have it updated until I've got a Wi-Fi connection. So from an end user perspective, you can make your workers so much more efficient and productive by giving them access to all of their data, all their applications, wherever they are. And I do work for McDonald's occasionally, but only if I'm in a
course you do, James.
Thought that was why you referenced it, James. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much as always for your input. Hopefully that's quite useful for people who are considering the cloud, thinking about whether or not they should be looking at it. I think it's an overwhelming yes from us that it needs to be front of agenda when it comes to planning for the future and look at any upcoming refreshes. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll obviously be back soon with some more videos.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Cheers.
all.